The morning sun cast long shadows across the jungle floor of Verdania Prime as alien soldiers moved through their training exercises. The trees reached up toward the sky like green towers, their thick canopy blocking most of the sunlight from reaching the ground below. In the middle of this wild place, the Galactic Coalition had built their forward operating base using metal and energy shields that hummed with power. Commander Zexthal stood on the observation platform, his forearms crossed behind his back as he watched the new recruits train. His insect-like head turned slowly from side to side, taking in every detail with his compound eyes. The Catherian species had been fighting wars for thousands of years, and Zexthal had seen many different kinds of soldiers in his time, but these new recruits were something different, something that made even his experienced mind wonder if the Coalition was making the right choice. The training ground buzzed with activity as alien soldiers practiced with their advanced weapons and equipment. The graceful Etherians moved like dancers, their pale blue skin seeming to glow in the filtered sunlight. Their leader, a scout named Veltara, guided her team through reconnaissance drills using hover drones that could phase through solid matter. The drones moved silently through the air, their sensors scanning everything around them and sending detailed information directly to the Etherians. Neural interfaces on the other side of the training ground, the heavily armored Kroggans practiced combat formations. Their thick, rock-like skin could stop most energy weapons, and their leader Thrak carried a plasma cannon that could melt through steel. The Kroggans had been the Coalition's heavy infantry for centuries, and they took pride in their role as the unstoppable force that could break through any enemy line. Between these two groups, looking small and out of place, stood 4 human soldiers. They wore simple green uniforms that seemed primitive compared to the high-tech armor of their alien counterparts. Their leader, Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, was a tall man with brown hair and steady eyes that took in everything around him. He had served in the United States Army Rangers before volunteering for the Coalition forces, and his experience showed in the way he carried himself. Beside Jake stood Corporal Lisa Martinez, a skilled marksman who had trained with sniper rifles since she was a teenager. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she held her weapon with the confidence of someone who had never missed an important shot. Private Danny Wright was the youngest of the group, barely 20 years old, but he had a natural talent for communication systems that had caught the attention of Coalition recruiters. The last member of their squad was Private Alex Thompson, whose expertise with explosives had made him valuable despite his quiet nature. The humans had been with the Coalition for only 3 weeks, but already they had become the subject of much discussion among the alien species. Most of the conversations were not positive. The aliens looked at human technology and saw nothing but primitive tools, where the Coalition forces used energy weapons that could adjust their power settings and ammunition types. Humans carried simple projectile weapons that fired metal bullets, where alien scouts used quantum sensors that could detect movement through solid barriers. Humans relied on their eyes and ears. Veltara finished her drone exercise and approached Commander Zexthal on the platform. Her movements were smooth and fluid like water flowing uphill. "Commander, I must express my concerns about including these humans in active missions," she said, her voice carrying the musical quality common to her species. "Their technology is centuries behind ours, and they show no signs of adapting to our methods." Zexthal clicked his mandibles together, a sign of deep thought among his people. "The Coalition Council has made their decision, Scout Leader. We need soldiers, and humans have proven themselves capable in ground combat. Their species has survived countless wars on their home planet using nothing but their natural abilities and simple tools." But Commander," Veltara continued, "they cannot interface with our combat systems. They cannot use our reconnaissance drones or access our tactical networks. In a real battle, they would be more of a burden than an asset." Thrak, the Kroggian leader, had been listening to the conversation with growing irritation. He stomped over to the platform, his heavy footsteps making the metal structure vibrate. "The Etherian speaks truth, Commander. These humans are weak and slow. They cannot survive the energy weapons of the hegemony and their primitive tools. will be useless against advanced armor. Why do we waste time training them when we could be preparing real soldiers for combat? Jake Morrison had been listening to the conversation from below, and he could understand enough of the alien languages to know what they were discussing. He had heard similar complaints from his alien teammates every day since arriving on Verdania Prime. The humans were too primitive, too dependent on outdated technology, too set in their ways to be useful in a modern galactic war. He looked at his squad members and saw the same quiet determination in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. They had not come here to prove themselves to aliens who looked down on them. They had come here to fight against the hegemony, the militaristic empire that threatened to dominate the galaxy and destroy the freedom that the coalition represented. Lisa Martinez checked her rifle for the 20th time that morning, running her hands along the familiar metal surface. The weapon was simple compared to the energy rifles that the alien soldiers carried, but she knew every part of it and could take it apart and put it back together in complete darkness. Danny Wright adjusted his radio equipment, testing the frequencies and making sure his communication systems were working properly. Alex Thompson organized his explosives, checking each device to make sure it would function when needed. Commander Zexthel watched the humans work and noticed something that his other officers had missed. While the alien soldiers relied on their technology to tell them if their equipment was functioning properly, the humans checked everything by hand. They touched their weapons, listened to their radios, and examined their gear with their own senses. They did not trust machines to tell them if their equipment was ready for combat. Perhaps, Zexthel said quietly, we should give these humans a chance to prove themselves. The war against the hegemony has been going badly, and our traditional methods have not been enough to secure victory. Maybe it is time to try something different. Veltara and Thrak exchanged glances, neither of them convinced that primitive humans could contribute anything useful to the Coalition's war effort. But they were soldiers, and they would follow orders even if they disagreed with them. The training continued throughout the day, with alien and human soldiers working side by side but never quite together. The technological gap between them seemed impossible to bridge, and the cultural differences made communication difficult. But as the sun began to set behind the jungle canopy, Commander Zexthel made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, he would send out a reconnaissance mission that would test both alien technology and human adaptability in ways that none of them could imagine. The briefing room hummed with the quiet energy of advanced technology as holographic displays flickered to life around the circular table. Commander Zexthel stood at the center, his forearms manipulating the controls with practiced ease. The three-dimensional image of the jungle terrain rotated slowly above the table, showing every tree, stream, and hill within a 50-kilometer radius of their base. Jake Morrison sat between his squad members, trying to make sense of the alien symbols and data streams that floated around the holographic map. The other humans looked equally confused by the advanced display system, but they remained silent and alert. Across the table, Veltara and her Etherean scouts studied the information through their neural interfaces, their pale blue eyes glowing faintly as data flowed directly into their minds. Thrak and his Krogan warriors occupied the far side of the table, their massive forms making the chairs creak under their weight. The rock-skinned soldiers seemed less interested in the technical details and more focused on the potential for combat. Their leader drummed his thick fingers on the table, creating a rhythmic tapping that echoed through the room. Intelligence. Reports indicate that hegemony forces have established a significant presence in Sector 7. Commander Zexthel began, his mechanical voice translator converting his clicks and whistles into words the humans could understand. Our long-range sensors have detected energy signatures consistent with a major fortification, but the dense jungle canopy has prevented detailed reconnaissance. The holographic display zoomed in on a section of jungle, approximately 10 kilometers from their current position. The area appeared as a green blur on the map, with scattered red dots indicating suspected enemy positions. Jake noticed that the red dots were marked with question marks, meaning the coalition had no solid intelligence about what they were facing. The enemy has deployed sophisticated jamming systems that interfere with our standard surveillance methods. Zexthel continued. Our orbital platforms cannot penetrate the electronic countermeasures, and our previous drone reconnaissance missions have failed to return usable data. Veltara leaned forward, her graceful movements catching the light from the holographic display. Commander, my scouts have been developing new phase shift techniques that should allow our drones to bypass most jamming systems. Our quantum sensors can penetrate solid matter and provide detailed intelligence about enemy positions and strength. She gestured with one elegant hand, and the holographic display changed to show a small, disc-shaped device floating in the air. The Mark 7 reconnaissance drone can operate for 72 hours without recharging and can transmit real-time data through quantum entanglement channels. The hegemony jamming systems cannot block quantum communication. Jake watched the presentation with growing interest. The alien technology was impressive, but something about Veltara's confidence bothered him. In his experience, enemy forces rarely made things as easy as they seemed. The hegemony had been fighting the coalition for years, and they had proven themselves capable of adapting to new threats. What about anti-aircraft defenses? Jake asked, speaking up for the first time during the briefing. If they have jamming systems, they probably have ways to shoot down drones too. Veltara turned to look at him, her expression showing mild annoyance at being questioned by a primitive human. Our drones can phase through solid matter, including energy shields and projectile weapons. They are virtually undetectable when operating in stealth mode. But what if they have new weapons we haven't seen before? Jake pressed. What if they've developed countermeasures specifically designed to stop your drones? Commander Zexthel clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. The human raises a valid concern, Scout Leader. The hegemony has shown considerable innovation in their defensive systems. We cannot assume that our technology will work as expected, Thrax snorted, a sound like rocks grinding together. Too much talking about machines and sensors. Send warriors to look at enemy. Warriors can see with eyes, fight with hands, machines break, warriors survive. The Krogan's simple approach brought nods from Jake and his squad. They understood the value of having backup plans when technology failed. But the alien officers seemed dismissive of such primitive thinking. The mission parameters are straightforward, Zexthel announced, bringing the discussion back to focus. A mixed reconnaissance team will advance to within observation range of the suspected enemy position. Scout Leader Veltara will lead the intelligence gathering operation using her advanced drone systems. The human soldiers will provide support and security. Jake felt a familiar frustration building in his chest. Once again, the humans were being relegated to carrying equipment and watching the aliens do the real work. He had led dozens of reconnaissance missions during his time in the Army Rangers, but the coalition commanders seemed to view him and his squad as nothing more than pack animals. What kind of support are we talking about? Lisa Martinez asked, her voice carefully neutral. Are we going to be part of the actual reconnaissance or just backup? Veltara answered before the commander could respond. Your role will be to establish a security perimeter while the real intelligence gathering takes place. You will carry extra power cells for our equipment and provide early warning if enemy forces approach our position. Danny Wright shifted uncomfortably in his seat. What about communication? If your quantum channels get jammed, how do we stay in contact with the base? Our communication systems are far more advanced than anything the hegemony can disrupt, Veltara replied with confidence. We have multiple redundant channels and can maintain contact even under the most adverse conditions. Jake pulled out a small notebook and began sketching the area shown on the holographic display. The action drew curious looks from the alien officers, who seemed puzzled by his primitive method of recording information. He ignored their stares and continued drawing, adding details about terrain features and potential approach routes. Why? Are you drawing pictures when you could download the data directly to your equipment? Veltara asked, her voice showing genuine confusion. Because pictures don't need power, Jake replied simply, and they don't break when you drop them in the mud. The alien officers exchanged glances. their expressions suggesting they thought the human was being deliberately difficult. But Commander Zexville seemed intrigued by Jake's approach. "The mission will commence at dawn," Zexville announced. "Team leaders will have 2 hours to prepare their personnel and equipment. The objective is intelligence gathering only, no engagement with enemy forces unless absolutely necessary for survival." As the briefing ended and the alien officers filed out of the room, Jake remained behind with his squad. They had learned to hold their own discussions after official briefings, sharing thoughts and concerns that the alien commanders might not understand. "Something doesn't feel right about this," Lisa said quietly. "They're awfully confident about their technology working against an enemy that's been adapting to their methods for years." "Yeah," Danny agreed. "And did you notice how they didn't mention any backup plans? What happens if all their fancy drones get shot down or jammed?" Alex Thompson, who rarely spoke during briefings, finally voiced his concern. "They're not treating us like soldiers. They're treating us like servants. We're supposed to carry their stuff and watch their backs while they do all the important work." Jake closed his notebook and looked at his squad members. "Maybe that's exactly what we need to be ready for. If their technology fails, we might be the only ones who can complete the mission." The 4 humans sat in silence for a moment, each of them thinking about the challenges ahead. They had signed up to fight alongside the coalition forces, but they were beginning to realize that they might end up fighting in spite of them. Tomorrow would bring new tests of both alien technology and human determination, and Jake had a feeling that the outcome would surprise everyone involved. The jungle air was thick with moisture as the reconnaissance team moved through the dense undergrowth in the early morning light. Veltara led the formation, her pale blue skin almost glowing in the filtered sunlight as she glided between the massive tree trunks. Her 3 Etherean scouts followed close behind, their movements so quiet that they seemed to float above the jungle floor. Behind them, Jake Morrison and his human squad moved with practiced military precision. They had painted their faces with mud and arranged leaves on their uniforms to blend with the jungle environment. Their boots made soft squelching sounds in the wet earth, but they maintained proper spacing and watched for signs of enemy activity. Thrak and his Krogan warriors brought up the rear, their heavy armor clanking softly with each step. The rock-skinned soldiers seemed less concerned with stealth than with being ready for a fight. Their plasma weapons hummed with contained energy, and their thick fingers rested near the trigger guards. The team had been moving for 3 hours when Veltara called a halt in a small clearing surrounded by towering trees. She gestured for her scouts to deploy their reconnaissance drones, and the small disc-shaped devices rose silently into the air. The drones shimmered and became nearly invisible as their phase-shift technology activated. "Beginning reconnaissance sweep," Veltara announced through her communicator. "Drones are advancing toward the target area. We should have complete intelligence within 30 minutes." Jake watched the alien technology with professional interest. The drones moved through the jungle canopy like ghosts, passing through branches and leaves without disturbing a single stem. Their quantum sensors probed ahead, searching for enemy positions and defensive systems. "This is much more efficient than human methods," one of the Etherean scouts commented, his voice carrying a note of superiority. "Your species would need hours to gather the same information we can collect in minutes." Lisa Martinez adjusted her rifle and scanned the surrounding jungle with her eyes. "Maybe, but our eyes don't need batteries," she replied quietly. The Etherean scout looked puzzled by her comment. But before he could respond, Veltara's expression changed from confidence to confusion. The soft blue glow that indicated her neural interface connection began to flicker and fade. "I'm getting strange readings from the drones," she said, touching the side of her head where her interface was located. "The quantum sensors are detecting some kind of interference." Jake felt a familiar tingle at the base of his neck, the same feeling he had learned to trust during his years as a soldier. Something was wrong, and it was about to get worse. The first drone suddenly stopped transmitting. Its signal vanished from Veltara's display as if it had never existed. The second drone lasted only a few seconds longer before it too disappeared. From the network, what's happening? Commander Zexthal's voice crackled through their communicators. We're losing telemetry from your reconnaissance drones. Veltara's graceful composure began to crack as her remaining drones failed one by one. The advanced technology that had seemed so reliable during the briefing was falling apart in the face of an unknown enemy countermeasure. It's some kind of quantum disruptor field, she said, her voice rising with panic. The enemy is using a weapon that scrambles quantum entanglement channels. All our drones are going offline? Jake pulled out his binoculars and began scanning the jungle ahead. The simple optical device worked perfectly despite whatever was affecting the alien technology. Through the lenses, he could see movement in the distant trees and the faint outline of artificial structures. I can see something up ahead, he reported. Looks like defensive positions about 2 kilometers from our current location. But Veltara was too focused on her failing equipment to listen. She frantically worked at her neural interface, trying to re-establish contact with her drones. Her scouts gathered around her, their own interfaces flickering and failing as the quantum disruptor field expanded. Thrak's heavy armor was also affected. The targeting systems in his helmet went dark, and the power readings on his plasma weapon began to fluctuate wildly. My equipment is failing, he growled. What kind of weapon can do this to our technology? The quantum disruptor field continued to spread, affecting more of the team's equipment with each passing minute. The aliens' communication systems began to stutter and fail. Their weapons lost power regulation, and their navigation systems stopped functioning entirely. Danny Wright tried to contact the base using his radio, but the human communication system was also experiencing interference. However, unlike the alien equipment, his radio was still partially functional. He could hear static and broken voices through the speaker. Base, this is reconnaissance team, he called into his microphone. We're experiencing heavy jamming, but we're still operational. The alien equipment is completely down. The response came through layers of static, but it was understandable. Copy, reconnaissance team. Continue mission as planned. Use manual methods if necessary. Jake looked at his squad members and saw the same calm determination in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. While the alien soldiers panicked about their failing technology, the humans simply adapted to the new situation. Lisa, can you get a better view from that tall tree? He asked, pointing to a massive jungle giant that rose above the canopy. She nodded and began climbing, using her hands and feet to find purchase on the rough bark. The aliens watched in amazement as she scaled the tree without any technological assistance, moving with the skill of someone who had learned to climb as a child. This is impossible, Veltara said, staring at the human soldier ascending the tree. How can she navigate without guidance systems or safety equipment? She learned to climb before she learned to use computers, Jake replied. Some skills don't need technology. Alex Thompson was examining the alien equipment with professional interest. These quantum disruptors are pretty clever, he said to Danny. They're targeting the specific frequencies that alien technology uses for communication and control. But they're not affecting our gear as much, Danny observed. Our radios use different frequencies and our equipment is simpler. There's less to disrupt. Lisa reached the top of the tree and called down to the team. I can see the enemy positions. They've got a major installation about 2 kilometers northeast of here. Looks like they've been preparing for this kind of encounter. Veltara's neural interface flickered one last time before going completely dark. Without her technology, she was effectively blind and helpless. Her scouts clustered around her equally, lost without their electronic aids. We need to abort the mission, she said, her voice shaking with fear. Without our drones and sensors, we can't gather intelligence or navigate safely back to base. Jake looked at the disabled alien soldiers and made a decision that would change everything. You can abort if you want to, he said quietly. But my squad is going to complete the mission. The humans had come to Verdania Prime to fight, not to rely on alien technology. Now they would prove that sometimes the simplest methods were the most effective, and that human determination could succeed where advanced technology failed, The real test was just beginning. Jake Morrison studied the towering tree that Lisa Martinez had climbed and knew immediately that he needed to go higher. The jungle giant stretched nearly 60 meters into the sky, its massive trunk thick enough that 10 people holding hands could not wrap around it. The bark was rough and weathered, with deep grooves that would provide good handholds for an experienced climber. While the alien soldiers continued to struggle with their failing equipment, Jake approached the base of the tree and began his ascent. He had learned to climb during his childhood in the mountains of Colorado, and the Army Rangers had taught him how to use those skills in combat situations. The thick jungle air made breathing difficult, but his body moved with practiced efficiency as he found each handhold and foothold. Veltara and her scouts watched in disbelief as the human soldier climbed without any safety equipment or technological assistance. Their species had developed anti-gravity systems and teleportation devices centuries ago, making such primitive methods seem impossible and dangerous. "He will fall and die," one of the Etherean scouts whispered to his companions. No intelligent being would attempt such a risky action without proper equipment. Thrak and his Krogan warriors were equally amazed, but for different reasons. Their heavy armor and massive bodies made climbing impossible, and they had always relied on their advanced technology to reach elevated positions. Watching a human scale the tree using nothing but his hands and feet challenged everything they thought they knew about physical capabilities. "The human is stronger than he appears," Thrak rumbled to his warriors. "Perhaps we have underestimated their species." Lisa Martinez took position at the base of the tree, her rifle ready to provide security for Jake's climb. Her sharp eyes scanned the surrounding jungle for any signs of enemy movement, while her ears listened for sounds that might indicate approaching danger. Danny Wright maintained radio contact with the base, his simple communication equipment still partially functional despite the quantum disruption field. "Base, this is reconnaissance team. We're proceeding with the mission using manual methods. The alien equipment is still completely down." The response came through heavy static, but the message was clear. "Copy, reconnaissance team, continue mission. Command is very interested in your manual intelligence gathering methods." Alex Thompson positioned himself where he could watch the approaches to their location while also keeping an eye on the alien soldiers. The Ethereans and Krogans had grouped together, their confidence shattered by the failure of their technology. Without their electronic aids, they seemed lost and helpless. Jake continued his steady climb, moving from branch to branch with careful precision. The tree swayed gently in the jungle breeze, but its massive size made it stable enough to support his weight. At 30 meters above the ground, he paused to rest and looked down at the small figures below. The alien soldiers looked even more confused from this height. Veltara was still trying to activate her neural interface, pressing her fingers against the side of her head in a desperate attempt to reconnect with her technology. Her scouts clustered around her like lost children, their pale blue skin seeming to glow with anxiety. Jake resumed his climb, pushing higher into the canopy where the branches became thinner and more flexible. At 40 meters, he could see over the tops of most of the surrounding trees. At 50 meters, the jungle spread out below him like a green ocean, with the enemy installation visible as a dark scar in the distance. He reached the 60-meter mark and found a stable position, where he could observe the enemy positions without being seen. The view was spectacular and terrifying at the same time. The hegemony forces had built a fortress that was far more extensive than anyone had imagined. The enemy installation covered several square kilometers, with multiple defensive perimeters and fortified positions. Jake could see energy shield generators, automated weapon systems, and what appeared to be a large command center protected by layered defenses. Troop barracks and supply depots were scattered throughout the complex, connected by covered walkways. That would protect soldiers from aerial attack. Jake pulled out his weathered notebook and began sketching what he saw. The simple pencil and paper worked perfectly at this height, unaffected by the quantum disruption field that had disabled all the alien technology. His trained eye captured details that even the most advanced sensors might have missed, he noted. The positions of guard towers and their fields of fire, sketching the angles and distances with military precision. The rotation patterns of the sentries became clear after several minutes of observation, and he recorded the timing and routes of their patrols. The defensive perimeter showed several weak points where the energy shields overlapped, creating small gaps that a skilled infiltrator might exploit. Jake sketched these vulnerabilities, noting the terrain features that would provide cover for an attacking force. Supply convoys moved along predictable routes between the storage depots and the main command center. Jake tracked their movement patterns and noted the times when the supply routes were most vulnerable to attack. He also observed the locations of fuel dumps and ammunition storage areas, which would be high-value targets for any assault force. The enemy had positioned their anti-aircraft weapons to cover the most obvious approach routes, but Jake could see blind spots where low-flying aircraft might be able to penetrate their defenses. He sketched these gaps in coverage, noting the terrain features that would hide approaching aircraft from the weapon systems. After an hour of careful observation, Jake had filled several pages of his notebook with detailed sketches and notes. The hand-drawn intelligence was more comprehensive than anything the alien drones had provided during their brief operational period. Every detail was recorded with the precision of a soldier who understood that lives would depend on the accuracy of his information. The climb down proved more challenging than the ascent, as Jake had to carefully navigate the flexible branches. While protecting his notebook from damage, his muscles ached from the extended climb, but his mind was sharp with the satisfaction of a job well done. When he reached the ground, the alien soldiers gathered around him with expressions of amazement and curiosity. Valtara looked at his simple notebook as if it contained alien technology more advanced than anything her species had ever developed. "You gathered intelligence using only your eyes and a writing instrument," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "How can such primitive methods be effective against a sophisticated enemy?" Jake opened his notebook and showed her the detailed sketches. "Sometimes the old ways work better than the new ones," he said simply. "Especially when the enemy is prepared for your technology but not for basic human skills." The aliens studied the hand-drawn maps and began to understand that they had witnessed something remarkable. The human soldier had accomplished in 1 hour what their advanced drones had failed to do in weeks of attempted reconnaissance. The mission was far from over, but Jake Morrison had proven that human determination and basic skills could succeed where alien technology had failed. The real test would come when they returned to base and had to convince the coalition commanders that sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective ones. The journey back to the coalition base took twice as long as the outward trip because the alien soldiers could not navigate without their electronic guidance systems. Valtara and her scouts stumbled through the jungle, their graceful movements replaced by clumsy steps as they struggled to find their way through the dense undergrowth. Thrak and his Krogan warriors fared slightly better, but their heavy armor caught on branches and roots, slowing the entire group. Jake Morrison led the way using his compass and the paper map he had drawn during the mission briefing. The simple instruments worked perfectly despite the continuing effects of the quantum disruption field, and his basic navigation skills proved more reliable than the sophisticated systems that had failed the alien soldiers. "Turn left at the next stream," Jake called back to the group, consulting his hand-drawn map. "We follow the water for about half a kilometer, then head uphill toward the base." Valtara watched the human soldier navigate with growing amazement. Her species had not used such primitive methods for thousands of years, and she had never imagined that paper maps and magnetic compasses could be so effective. The quantum disruption field that had rendered her technology useless had no effect on Jake's simple tools. "How do you know which direction to go without satellite guidance?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine curiosity. "The sun rises in the east and sets in the west," Jake replied, pointing to the afternoon light filtering through the canopy. "The moss grows thicker on the north side of trees, and streams usually flow toward larger bodies of water. You just have to pay attention to the signs." The alien soldiers had never learned to read such natural indicators, because their technology had always provided them with precise positioning data. Now, cut off from their electronic aids, they were completely dependent on human skills they had dismissed as primitive and useless. Danny Wright maintained sporadic radio contact with the base as they traveled, his simple communication equipment still partially functional despite the jamming. Base, this is reconnaissance team. We're returning with valuable intelligence. Estimated arrival time is 30 minutes. The response came through heavy static, but Commander Zexthal's mechanical voice was recognizable. Copy, reconnaissance team. Report to briefing room immediately upon arrival. Command staff is very interested in your findings. When they finally reached the base, the contrast between human and alien capabilities was obvious to everyone who saw them. Jake and his squad looked tired but alert, their equipment functioning normally despite the electronic warfare they had encountered. The alien soldiers appeared confused and disoriented, their advanced technology still affected by the quantum disruption field they had experienced. Commander Zexthal was waiting in the briefing room with several other senior officers when the team arrived. His compound eyes studied the group with obvious interest, noting the differences between the human and alien soldiers. Report, he ordered, his mechanical voice echoing through the room. Valtara stepped forward, her usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. Commander, the enemy has deployed quantum disruption technology that completely disabled our reconnaissance drones and guidance systems. We were unable to gather any useful intelligence using our standard methods. The alien officers around the table clicked and whistled among themselves, their expressions showing concern about this new enemy capability. If the hegemony could neutralize coalition technology so effectively, it would change the entire nature of the war. However, Valtara continued, Staff Sergeant Morrison was able to gather intelligence using primitive visual observation methods. He climbed a tree and drew pictures of the enemy positions. The alien officers turned to look at Jake with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Commander Zexthal gestured for him to approach the briefing table. Show us what you observed, Staff Sergeant. Zexthal said. Jake opened his notebook and began spreading his hand-drawn sketches across the table. The simple pencil drawings looked primitive compared to the holographic displays the aliens were accustomed to, but the detail and accuracy were immediately apparent. The enemy has built a major fortress complex covering approximately 3 square kilometers, Jake began, pointing to his sketches. They have multiple defensive perimeters with overlapping fields of fire, but there are several weak points where the shields create gaps. He continued his briefing, explaining the guard rotations, supply routes, and weapon positions he had observed from his perch in the tree. The alien officers listened with growing interest as Jake described details that their advanced sensors had never detected. The quantum disruption field is being generated from this central facility, Jake said, pointing to one of his sketches. If you could knock out the power source, all their electronic warfare capabilities would be disabled. Commander Zexthal studied the drawings with his compound eyes, noting the precision and detail that Jake had captured. These observations are more comprehensive than any intelligence we have gathered in months of surveillance attempts. One of the alien officers leaned forward to examine the sketches more closely. How can hand-drawn pictures provide more accurate information than our quantum sensors? Because the quantum sensors told you what they were programmed to detect, Jake replied. But my eyes saw everything that was actually there. I noticed things like the timing of supply convoys and the blind spots in their defenses because I was looking for tactical advantages, not just measuring energy signatures. The alien officers exchanged glances, beginning to understand that human observation methods offered advantages they had never considered. The ability to gather intelligence without depending on electronic systems was invaluable when facing an enemy that could disrupt technology. We need to change our reconnaissance doctrine, Valtara said quietly. If the hegemony can neutralize our technology, we need soldiers who can operate without electronic support. Commander Zexthal clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Staff Sergeant Morrison, would you be willing to train our scouts in these visual observation techniques? Jake looked at his squad members and saw approval in their eyes. Yes, sir, but it's going to take time to learn. These skills can't be downloaded to a neural interface. They have to be practiced until they become second nature. Over the following weeks, Jake and his squad began training mixed human-alien units in basic reconnaissance skills. They taught the aliens how to read terrain features, track movement patterns, and gather intelligence using nothing but their natural senses. Galtara proved to be an eager student, her natural grace adapting well to the physical demands of climbing and observation. She learned to move quietly through the jungle and to notice details that her technology had previously identified for her. "I understand now why your species survived so long without advanced technology," she told Jake during one training session. "You developed skills that do not depend on machines or power sources." The success of Jake's intelligence gathering led to a major assault on the Hegemony Fortress. Coalition forces used his hand-drawn maps to identify the weak points in the enemy defenses and to time their attack for maximum effectiveness. The quantum disruption generators were destroyed in the first wave, allowing Coalition technology to function normally again. But the real victory was the recognition that human methods had value in a high-tech war. The Coalition began integrating human soldiers into all their reconnaissance units, ensuring that they would never again be completely helpless when their technology failed. Jake Morrison had proven that sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective ones, and that human determination could succeed where advanced technology failed. The galaxy had learned to respect the species that could climb trees and draw pictures by hand, because those primitive skills had won them a war.